Hello and welcome back. In the last lesson, we looked at some inline CSS because we wrote CSS in the line of the element, such as a div. And in this video, we are going to learn about internal CSS. Now, internal CSS is where we take all that CSS and we apply it in a specific type of element in HTML. We can give it little shortcuts. We can tell it to select all of the elements. We can tell it to select just a couple elements based on its class or its ID, and we're going to learn about all those things right now. So officially, this is a CSS crash course. It's very, very, very light, so it's only going to be a couple minutes long, but we're going to learn a ton. So let's go ahead and get started with that right now. Okay, so I have VS Code open, and I'm just going to create a new document here, and I'm going to save this as internal _css.html. And let's go ahead and create our structure. We've got head, we've got a title in here. Let's call this internal CSS. Let's add a body. All of this stuff you should be quite familiar with by now. And we're going to title this one internal CSS. And we're going to give this, let's give this 4 divs. Let's give it 4 divs. Let's actually space these out. Div number 1 and then we're going to do this a few more times. So div number 2, let's go make some space for us to work here. Div number 3, and lastly, number 4, div number 4. Nailed it. Okay. And then let's just open this up in Firefox. And so that's from the last lesson. And let's open up internal CSS. So we have 5 block elements here. We have an internal CSS line, that's our header, that's our H1, that's a block element. We have divs 1 through 4, those are all div elements and they're all block elements as well. So now, from our last lesson, we said, well, we want a particular div to have a background color of blue. When we refresh our page, the background color turns to blue. Now, if we wanted this to happen on every single element, every single div, we would have to write this 4 times. Because there's 4 divs. And if there's 400 divs, we have to write this 400 times. And that is no way to live your life. So we are going to introduce our second element to the head. And this is called style. So it is simply a style element, open styling tag, closing styling tag, and inside of it we can write CSS. Now we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of CSS and how all of it works. This is simply a quick crash course. So in CSS, there are these things called selectors, classes, and IDs. Classes we've actually sort of taken a look at, and IDs we've sort of taken a look at in the sense that we've actually only seen it. We haven't seen it in practice yet. So these match up with, class and ID. And something is wrong with my syntax highlighting here, and it's probably just because I have regular text here. Yeah, there it is. So we have classes, we have IDs, and those go on the elements themselves, and then we can grab every single element. So let's do a few different scenarios here. So let's do a div. We're going to select every div element, and all we do is we say div, curly bracket, and then we end it with another curly bracket. And then we type background color blue. Save that, refresh our page, and all of them turn blue. So now we can get rid of this style guy. We can get rid of the inline CSS in favor of internal CSS. Internal CSS is just CSS that's written across the page, but now we have access to nice little shortcuts, like being able to select every div. If you wanted to select every paragraph and div, you would add a comma, paragraph. And if you wanted to select every paragraph, div and H1, you just add comma H1. And voila, just like that. Now, let's go ahead and leave this with just the H1. Cool. So we said all H1 tags on this page, all H1 elements on this page have to have a background color of blue and a font color of white. Okay, so we have something going on here. Let's style this up a little bit, and let's also select the body, because we can select the whole thing. And let's do background color. We've got gray, Gainsboro. I didn't even know that was a color, but I like that one. There we go. So it's not quite as bright and in your face, just a light gray background color. Let's go ahead and add a class and an ID to every single div. By the way, for multiple pointing like that, all I do is I click where I want to edit. So let's say I want to edit just after the V, and then I hit Command and click again. So Command click, and if you're on Windows, it should be just Control click. And now you can type in multiple places at the same time. So now let's take a look at classes. A class is how we basically give an element a particular style, much like this, but we're telling it to only style certain ones. So we specify classes with a dot. So dot, let's call this font red. And we're going to change the color to red. Now just out of the box, this does nothing. And we can see it in our source code that we have font red in here. In fact, I also forgot my doc. Doc type, there we go. That looks better. And that red HTML went away. So we have that font red in there, and it does nothing. We have to actually specify it to do something. So we are going to give div1 and div2 a class of font red. There's no dot in here, so you don't see the dot. That dot is actually short for class. That's what this looks like. So it's basically the same thing here. And look at that, div1 and div2 have turned red. Now you don't need to know all the CSS stuff. This is not a CSS course. These are just some very common CSS declarations that I'm going to be using just because they're nice and easy. And you will learn all of this stuff when you jump into CSS after you learn HTML. The next one is an ID. So we have class of font red and an ID. Now an ID has to be completely unique. You can see we're using font red twice in here, but an ID should only ever be used once. So let's go ahead and create a unique ID, and let's just call it unique. And this one is going to be a border 1 pixel solid red. And actually let's change that 1 pixel to maybe something a little more in your face. 5 pixels solid. Let's not do red, let's do black. So again, right out of the box, this is not going to do anything, but we can add unique, and much like class, we don't add this original symbol. We just call this unique. And so now there's a class and an ID on here. And look at that. Now, theoretically, we can use unique on multiple classes at the same time, and it will work in CSS. So that works. It is highly recommended that you do not do that. So keep IDs as completely unique. Think of it as your identity card, your government issued driver's license or identity card. There's only one, and it's made for you. There's only one ID, and it's made for this div element. Think of it that way. Now, even though it works in CSS, doesn't mean you should do it. And the reason for that is because in JavaScript, you're actually able to grab elements by an ID. And if there are two of them, JavaScript will only ever grab the first one. And that is a big problem. You don't want it to try to select both, because if you're looking at one and it selects the other, all of a sudden you have a bug in your system, and that's not a good thing. Now ID, you can think of ID as that number sign. So it looks like this: ID, number sign, ID, number sign, ID, number sign. And so this ID, or this unique word, matches this. And lastly, there's 1.5 more things we have to go over. There should only ever be one ID, so never create more than 2 IDs on a particular element. It should be completely unique. If you need to do that, you probably want to use a class. The reason I'm saying that is because a class, you can have font red. Let's do 3 and 4. So we've got font red here, and we have font red here. Front red, font red is what I meant to type. And so it's all red now. But what if we wanted to change div 3 and div 4 to also have a different background color? So let's call it BG blue and BG yellow. Now, you're going to want to forgive me for this because this is going to be really ugly. So actually, I'm just going to go back down here. What I did here was I have font red, and then to add another class, I just added a space. Just like that. And then you can add another class, and then a space, and then another class. IDs do not work that way, but classes do. So let's go ahead and add BG blue. Background color, nope, background color. We want it to be blue. And then BG yellow, nope, class BG yellow. Background color, we want this to be yellow. Save and refresh, and whoa! Look at that ugliness that we created. This is a crash course into CSS, so you're not going to be learning all the ins and outs and how to make things beautiful, but you have now learned about classes, IDs, and just regular element selectors. These are big wins for when you jump into CSS, because you are somewhat already familiar with how this works. Now, I want you to actually get some hands-on experience with this. Again, this is not a CSS class, so if you get stuck, honestly, feel free to just move on. It's not the end of the world. You will learn all this CSS officially in the next chapter of your web development journey. So what I would like you to do for your task, let's go ahead, make a new file. Your task is create a new .html file, add the style element to your head, and then add, let's say 3 divs. Add 3 divs to your body. And then I want you to select and style one div using a element selector. And just as a refresher on that one, an element selector looks like this. So there's no dot, there's no number sign, it's just the name of the element. So style one div using an element selector. If you don't know what to use, you can always use something like background color blue, or background color white, or background color red, or color black, something like that. You can literally just steal the code that I wrote in this video. I just want you to write it out as well. It's good for some hands-on practice. And then I want you to select and style one other div using a class. So use the dot notation. And lastly, select and style one other div using an ID. Just like that. Let's make that smaller so we can see this all on one page-ish. So create a new HTML file, add your style to your head, add 3 divs to your body, select one div using an element selector and style it whichever way you like. Then I want you to select and style another div using the class. So use that dot in there. You're going to have to use the class attribute as well. And then I would like you to style or select and style one other div, so your third div, using an ID. And you're going to have to use the ID attribute for that as well. Once you're done that, I'm going to show you a way in which we can write CSS once and include it in multiple files, because right now we are limited. We are limited to copying and pasting this on every single HTML file that we want to put the styling on. Now that's okay if you have 5 pages, but if you have 1,000 pages, that is a job you do not want to have. You do not want to be doing the same thing 1,000 times. That's pretty painful. So I'm going to show you officially how to do this as a front-end developer in that next video.